Hello, I'm Molly Presley, the host of Data Unchained. We're broadcasting today from NAB, the big media and entertainment show in Las Vegas, Nevada, and we'll be welcoming guests today that are from this industry. But before we jump into that, let me tell you a little bit more about Data Unchained. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, you should be here if you're interested in using decentralized data. As data has become more distributed across the edge, different cloud regions, different types of clouds, multiple data centers, and even remote users, using data in this decentralized world has become a big challenge, but there's a lot of opportunity buried within it. We focus on both the challenges as well as the solutions, putting that decentralized data to work. Let me introduce today's guests. So first I have John Gleeson. John is the CEO of Storj. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Molly. Happy to be here. It's great to be at NAB and see all the things going on here. And, personally, I'm a bit of a foodie, so it's kind of a nice thing that they have so many different great restaurants in Vegas. I'm not much of a gambler, not much of anything else, but it is great to have the food here.
I like the food and I like the shows.
Absolutely.
And then Chad is a return guest, actually, but he's got a new spin. So We'll talk to Chad. But Chad, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you, Molly. I love being on Data Unchained, by the way. This is my second appearance. Previously, I was representing HP as a part of the Teradici acquisition, and now I'm a part of Hammerspace, so I'm excited to attend this Data Unchained podcast.
Awesome. So, Chad, we'll go with you first. Tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe outside of work. What do you do, and what kind of brought you into this industry?
Yeah, so I'm a Southern California boy. I've been in San Diego, about 15 years now, so I call it home. I have two darling girls. And my wife, of course. Then we have been happily married for about 10 years now. So just dealing with that and dealing with my job and everything else in between.
Great. And what brought you to Hammerspace from the Teradici HP Anywhere world?
So that's a really interesting story. So we were introduced to Hammerspace at the tail end of the pandemic, right? When people were trying to figure out how they can return to work or at least get some kind of productivity, even though they couldn't go into their corporate offices. So my first experience with Hammerspace was this remote collaboration use case where people still had to work from home and also collaborate across various geos, right? And we took care of that last mile solution at Teradici, where we were the remote desktop protocol, and Hammerspace was the orchestration layer in the back end to allow everybody to kind of work on the same data sets at the same time during the pandemic, of course. So it was a really interesting use case. I kind of fell in love with it, and I decided to come on board, right? So here I am.
Awesome. And moving over to you, John, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, like Chad, I have two daughters and a wife. I've been married almost 20 years now. With the family, I'm a Detroit native, so Midwest, love the winters, but the last 4.5 years I've been living in Cayman Islands for Storj, and it's a bit of a change. We don't have much snow there, but it's been a kind of a fun shift. And so, just love the outdoors, love home improvement, love doing some cooking stuff, and just hanging out with the family.
So tell us about Storj.
So Storj is a really interesting project. We are a drop-in replacement for Amazon S3, but instead of building data centers, racking servers, stuffing those servers full of hard drives, connecting the internet and calling it cloud, what we do is we find internet and data center capacity all around the world, and we aggregate all of that underutilized capacity and make it available as a single namespace of object storage. And so it's a kind of like the Airbnb of hard drives, and we're able to provide a service that is 80% cheaper than Amazon, but faster globally with about an 80% lower carbon footprint. So it's really an exciting service, and we found that there's a lot of synergy between what we do and what Hammerspace does. And so it's really just kind of an interesting offering and a way to solve a problem that nobody else is doing today, very much like Hammerspace.
So lower cost and lower carbon footprint, two big C-suite priorities right now. Mm-hmm. As you think about this concept of bringing together available bandwidth, available storage, how do you make it reliable?
One of the things we do is instead of making copies of data and replicating it across different availability zones, what we have is actually one regionless layer of storage. It's 25,000 endpoints in 107 different countries today. And instead of making the replicas, what we do is we erasure code the data, which means we break it into little tiny pieces. Those tiny pieces have redundancy, so every object is at least 65 pieces, of which any 29 will be used to recreate that object. And then we distribute those pieces over that 25,000 node network.
Okay.
And so what you end up with is no single point of failure, but an extremely performant network because you have very high parallelism, being able to move a lot of pieces of data all at the same time. Again, a synergy with Hammerspace.
Very interesting. So let's talk about decentralized data. A lot of the focus on this show is about people trying to put data to work that's located in a lot of places, and it sounds like in some ways you're decentralizing it even more, and there's a good reason for that, right?
That's correct. So we have a slightly different take on decentralization where decentralization of data is a challenge, but decentralization of infrastructure can be a benefit.
Yes.
And so what we have is 25,000 disparate data center operators and individuals contributing their capacity to our service. And so we have a fully decentralized backend, and we're able to take data or infrastructure that's already being spun, powered, and cooled, that's already been put in service, and make it even more valuable because for us, a hard drive that's 25% full doesn't use any more energy or cost anymore than a hard drive that's 75% full. So if we can utilize that underutilized infrastructure to provide a better service, right, that's a benefit, especially to people in an industry where they care a lot about cost and carbon footprint.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chad, how do you see this weaving into the Hammerspace environment?
Yeah, I really see it as a really strong strategic partnership for us. When we talk to our customers and they're kind of contemplating this idea of setting up presence in other locations and other geos, Storj comes into play that, you don't have to worry about the additional replication of your buckets between different regions. Let's say, for example, in AWS or Google, where they have this centralized, regionalized model. Right, with Storj, your data is always available, regardless of where you're at, regardless of what region you're in. So it's very easy just to kind of plug in a solution of Hammerspace at other regions when this data is always geographically available to begin with. Right, this one less step that the end user has to worry about configuring and managing.
So you'll know what I'm talking about here. A lot of the times with Amazon, we get pulled in Hammerspace to help unify data sets across regions, right?
Yes.
Because that's not something that is native in Amazon. With Storj, that's not necessary. That's already
That is
unified.
correct, as well as the lack of egress costs, right? Which is always that unknown when you're testing workloads in the cloud, is what is that egress going to cost? Right, and that is always that thing that stings our customers at the end of the day when they get that bill and they realize, I doubled my cost this month because I actually did something productive in my environment. Right, so that's another reason why we really like Storj as a partnership.
Okay, so you have your data in whichever local infrastructure you want based on where you're connecting from. Am I understanding that right? How do you decide where the data ends up landing based on the user's environment?
It's really something that's up to the customer to decide.
Okay.
So by default, data is distributed globally. So it's going to be high performance no matter where you are in the world. But we'll also restrict it to just the US or just Europe or just a SOC 2 certified facilities in the US, right? Depending on what your compliance requirements are, your performance requirements are, and your regional data sovereignty requirements are, we'll help you meet those objectives. But the great thing is that ultimately, even though that data is sitting in a neutral place in the middle, it has to get to the location where the user needs it to do something useful. And that's really where we love the Hammerspace partnership, because that orchestration layer that actually takes it from that neutral location and gets it to where the workload needs to be done is super efficient and super effective for us. And as we're globally distributed and we can work with those distributed teams, ultimately there is something that needs to move the data to the right places, and that's where Hammerspace comes in.
Okay, got it. So data orchestration is key. Maybe Chad, you've spent a lot of time on objectives, and how does Hammerspace help with placing data where it needs to be?
Yeah, I mean, if you kind of start from the applications that the individuals use all the way up to the replication and back down on the other side where the other users in the remote sites will want to use the applications again. In the middle is that layer of Storj, right? So what we do is we set an objective, which is called a place on. And the place on that we'll use is send it to an S3 bucket. And then what we do is we lay our file system on that bucket, and then we actually move the files into that bucket on top of our proprietary file system, and then back down the other side where it gets reconstituted again as that exact same file. Now, the beauty of the Hammerspace file system is those can be both actively accessed at the same time, using the bucket as a means to transport the data between the various sites very efficiently. Now, why we have our own proprietary file system is because we're deduping and compressing the data in between. So not only is it very efficient in the cloud in the bucket, but it's also very efficient from a WAN perspective, right?
Okay.
So that is the core benefit of our partnership together.
I guess one other benefit is that you have that rich metadata layer also.
That's
and
correct.
so object storage is great for that efficient storage of data, but it doesn't really lend itself well to knowing a lot of information about that data. And when you layer in what Hammerspace does with the metadata management and also the enterprise integration for like access management controls and all of that good stuff, right? It really becomes a seamless, fluid way to get your data wherever you need it when you need it.
Okay, so while we're thinking about connecting infrastructure and data sets, how dependent on networking is this? Do you have to have an extremely high availability, screaming fast pipe, or can you use which networks exist? Talk maybe a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so on the sort of the node decentralized network supply side, because there are so many nodes, we're not really dependent on the speed of any one node or its connectivity, right? So those individual nodes can all be average, but the overall performance across all nodes is incredibly high. And so if an end user has a 1 gig line, we're going to saturate it. A 10 gig line, we're going to saturate it. A 100 gig line, we're going to put a big dent in that thing,
Nice.
right? So when you're thinking about, object storage on the internet, having that unbounded ability to just to tap right into the Hammerspace orchestration to be able to move it with incredible speed to where you need it to be, it really just seems from a user's perspective like they're just operating on their desktop and they never even notice any of that latency or any of that movement because Hammerspace makes that so seamless and because Storj makes that whole high throughput just work so nicely with that orchestration.
Okay, and then Chad, I think so that's, we have made our decentralized data extra decentralized now,
Yeah, exactly.
but super fast in delivering it into the file system and application.
Yes.
Maybe you can talk a little bit more about once it arrives there and you want to feed this into fast GPU farms and
Sure.
how does Hammerspace deliver the data and keep that performance going?
Yeah, I mean, well, so, if you think about an AI workflow or an HPC workflow or even an M&E workflow, they're still reliant on the POSIX aspect of NFS and even SMB, right? So there's a protocol translation layer that happens that we take care of. So we're changing an object API call and the highly parallelism that's provided by that API down to POSIX compliance, ACLs and permissions and everything else that then we use to feed the GPUs as well in a very parallelized fashion itself. But our parallelization happens differently than your parallelization. Our parallelization is what we call our parallel file system that basically sits on the site and provides the throughput and the latency to feed the GPUs, right? So kind of the best of both worlds. Their parallelism happens in the cloud to bring the objects back down to us. Then we turn those into files and, of course, feed the GPUs in another parallelism fashion as well.
So it seems like if you're thinking about organizations who are maybe they're thinking about their cloud journey, whether they're going to, coming back, wherever your journey is on the cloud, thinking about their AI architectures and what they might do with AI, there's a lot of need to design for flexibility right now, right? Organizations don't know which models, which applications, which locations they're going to be using in the future. And it sounds like this is kind of the match made in heaven as you're choosing the components of your future architectures that still give you flexibility, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that we see is, a customer may choose one GPU provider for their model training, but they want to use a bunch of different providers for inference.
Sure.
And
yeah.
Being able to provide that neutral layer that will work with any GPU farm or any location, where you can take advantage of latent capacity in your own multiple environments or in that of a third party, Hammerspace is what gets that data to that GPU.
Okay.
And that is why exactly it's so nice working together.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've noticed that there's a trend in the enterprise, and it's not just about moving to the cloud, but that's part of it, of wanting to be more open, standards-based, open architectures. I think that Hammerspace has a lot of vision there as well in the work done with Linux, but maybe let's talk a little bit. Why is open important, and how is the Hammerspace technology moving organizations who require that forward?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, right? I really see the world as, when you put your data into a cloud, you're beholden to consuming those services, right? And this whole concept of data gravity and keeping your data in one vendor or another, doesn't matter who the cloud provider is, they all have the same model, right? And a little bit about S3 in general, it's a loss-leading technology for a lot of the cloud providers because their idea is to sell more proprietary services and vendor lock you into their cloud. Mm-hmm. Now, where I see the value of Storj is you're really breaking that cycle. And you're one of the first people in the industry to actually do that and allow you to pick and choose what services you want to use at the end of the day. Either an open source service or a proprietary service. It's really up to you to decide the best model for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe talking a little bit more about how that would work and getting to the different models. And it sounds like you even have an open source component.
Yeah, so all of our software is open source.
Okay.
And when you're sort of running your software on anyone's infrastructure, they want to be able to look at the code that's running. And so it's very important for us to be open. And we also see new deployment models emerging within the enterprise. And one of the exciting things with Hammerspace is working with you not only on our cloud service, but running that same cloud service that has been proven in the most hostile environment possible, running it inside of the decentralized infrastructure within a single enterprise. And so we've seen, working together recently, that this is an alternative to Ceph that allows that same level of data aggregation across a variety of infrastructure, but doing it in a way that doesn't require a lot of overhead, doesn't require a lot of care and feeding and management, and is extremely stable when you need to move large volumes of data very quickly, for example, like you do with Hammerspace with the orchestration and the AI and ML workloads.
That's kind of amazing. So you have open source software, you're taking advantage of existing capacity and network. With the Hammerspace piece, you can integrate all of that plus any other storage systems you have in place today, your NVMe or whatever it is, and access it all with standard Linux clients with amazing performance. So this whole idea of moving out of the proprietary locked-in world to something much more open and using the architecture and infrastructure you want and already exists, I can't even fathom the efficiencies that can go into a customer's environment this way.
Yeah, it's amazing that this is all available today. That
Yes.
You can go, and with Hammerspace and Storj together, you can have the solution today.
Okay, great topic. So guys, thank you so much for jumping on. It's busy here at NAB. It's a tough time to carve out a little bit of speaking time, but this has been a really great episode. Before we tie up, where can people go learn more about Storj if they want to delve into a little bit more on case studies or where their data is going to sit or anything like that? What are do they just check out your website, or is there something you want to point them to more specifically?
Oh, I think the website is probably the best place to start, right? So Storj, you can find us at storj.io, and you'll find a bunch of information, and you can also get started for free. So we have a free trial, so you can try it out for yourself, see the benefits of a decentralized backend with an S3 front end, and then reach out and imagine, Chad, you'll tell us where to find information on Hammerspace where you can work with Storj.
Yeah, so Bali and myself can help guide people to the Hammerspace website, but it's hammerspace.com, and on that website there's plenty of information that can be had.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just kind of want to re-emphasize something that Chad said at the beginning. And so somebody wants to try you out and put some data in, and maybe later they want to move to something else, there's no egress fees. Is that correct?
So we have very, very low egress fees, but we also have bundles that have no egress at all.
Okay.
So depending on what your model is, we can go no egress, or we can go low egress, or pay as you go, however you want to do it.
So check it out for free and then talk to you about what your model looks like in the future.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much for joining the show.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Data Unchained, powered by Hammerspace. To learn more, visit hammerspace.com. If you have a guest you would like to hear on the show, email me at molly@hammerspace.com.